Twilight. Inside the small, dilapidated wooden house, the fire crackled in the old stove. Tongues of flame greedily licked just thrown birch logs, warming with their heat and illuminating the small space around them. A beautiful girl of 22, with red hair and green eyes, sits next to her boyfriend, who is 6 years older than her. He is of slim build, with blue eyes and dark short-cropped hair. The young couple sat in an embrace on a large dark-colored bear skin, which was laid on the wooden floor at some distance from the stove. Grisha, I explained to you already. Well, Marussia, give up these prejudices. You to 23, just a few months left. I asked you not to call me. All right, Masha. Exactly. It won't be long before we find out whether it's true or not. What truth? Someone made up something about your great-great-grandmother on purpose, and that's it. What's your family's disease or whatever they say? Any confirmation from the doctors? This is nonsense. Don't say that. I don't know, but I'm afraid to even think about it. Some say disease, and some say we have some kind of misfortune in our family. Well, come here, Grigory hugged his girlfriend. I think all this is nothing. Everyone you know, and remember, nothing concrete to say themselves could not. Therefore, I think that all this is nonsense and we do not have to wait until you're 23 to officially become husband and wife. I've been waiting a year already, and people will be less likely to talk nonsense since it'll be about my family. No, I've decided to wait. According to rumors, my late distant relatives, before they reached the age of 23, began to behave inadequately. Anyone past that age, they were fine, like my mom and my grandmother. I don't know the others. Suit yourself. All right, why am I in a hurry? You're a very beautiful girl. Yes, stop it, embarrassed Maria said and bumped into Gregory's chest. I'm serious. You many look at you. Here I am afraid, and what if they take away? Kissed the top of the girl. And these 3 newcomers. Did you see the way they behaved? Yes, unpleasant types. What are they doing in our village? And about my looks, yes, I'm unusual and they're talking about that too. What if it's just payback and something happens to me in the family? I'll be the next in our generation of crazy? She smiled. Silly. I will still love you. I'll love you anyway. You're my red-haired sunshine. Maria's house was on the outskirts of the village. It was old, but the girl loved it. For her, it was like a memory of her grandmother. Masha's mother lived in a small town nearby, but the girl did not want to spend time with her. Her mother did not come out of the constipation. Therefore, Maria, after 20, finally moved to the village. Here she met with Gregory. Maria immediately told him about her fears and conditions, and he only laughed and constantly said that she herself did not wind herself up. The young couple likes to fry pancakes together and eat them with jam. Masha likes the dim light. She often does not turn on the lights, being satisfied with candles and light from the stove. Guy and girl often chastely spend evenings near the hot stove, eating fragrant late apples and talking about various topics, after which Grigory leaves for his home. A few days later, Maria, having collected the last fallen leaves from the yard, tidies up the house and sweeps the wooden floor. Tonight, Grigory promised to come to her again and bring cream cakes for tea. Masha wanted to still have time to bake her lover his favorite pancakes, but poked into the refrigerator, and there were no eggs. The girl, in a thin beige sweater and dark sports pants, threw on a jacket, put on shoes, and ran to the store. Unfortunately, it was at the other end of the village. Masha shoved her hands in her pockets and walked quickly down the street. Here comes the cold fall. Winter is close at hand. Good, at least the rains have stopped. I'm tired of needing this mess. Euro. The girl thought as she hurried to the store. She was in a hurry to come back and have time to bake pancakes for the arrival of Grisha. So Masha walked not on the asphalt road, but on the dirt road and along the paths, past other people's houses. Sniffing her nose and letting steam out of her mouth, the girl smiled, anticipating another meeting with the friend of her heart. It was getting dusk outside. From fall to spring, it was always darker in the village than in the city from the afternoon. Maria was already halfway through her walk when she heard music being yelled from one house where some unknown young men had recently taken up residence. "Hey, pretty girl," came from Maria's right side. The girl turned around and through the low wooden fence saw a guy on the porch. This unpleasant type with long hair, tucked into a ponytail, defiantly looked at Masha. He'd blocked her way several times in the last month since he'd been here, but she'd always managed to slip away. But today, apparently, was not her day. Maria turned away without answering, increasing the speed of her stride. At the same time, he whispered something to the second, black-haired man with a hedgehog haircut. The black-haired man nodded and ran behind the house. There's that asshole again. A thought the girl, lifting the collar of her jacket higher. Suddenly, from behind the corner in front of her, the same black-haired man appeared, grinning and chewing a dry blade of grass in his mouth. Masha turned around and went the other way, but from there came a third, bald, a little overweight guy, swaying from the alcohol. In one hand he held an axe, and in the other a stack of firewood. The girl looked around panicked. There was nowhere to run to. "Invite the girl over," shouted the long-haired man, raising up a bottle of liquor. The bald man threw the wood on the ground and headed toward Masha. Together with the black-haired man, they grabbed the girl and dragged her into the house. Masha screamed, calling for help, but no one from the neighboring houses came to her aid. The black-haired man covered her mouth with his palm and they pushed the girl into the room, throwing her on the couch. "No, don't. Please, let go, let go," she begged them. Maria begged and shouted at them, but they just stood there, looking at her and laughing. "I didn't finish the wood. Eek, I'll be right back," said the bald man, hiccuping, and went outside. The long-haired one and the swarthy one began to molest the girl, tearing off her outer clothes. They smirked at all her threats, saying that their relative, in case of anything, would take care of everything and it would be better for her to shut up and be a goody-goody. Masha fought back as hard as she could, but the swarthy one held her arms, and the long-haired one groped the young girl. "Get away from her, you bastards!" Behind one of the rapists heard the voice of Grigory. "Grisha!" cried Masha. "Hey, who are you? Get away from her, rake!" Grigory pounced on the long-haired leader of the gang. Maria rushed to her boyfriend, screaming, but the black-haired one of his hand twisted her arm back, and the second caught in her hair. Suddenly there was a thud. Masha looked at Grigory. He, without taking his eyes off her, settled on the floor. A trickle of blood ran down his temple and he immediately collapsed face down. "What did you do, asshole?" the long-haired man asked, wiping a red drop from his cheek. Next to Grigory, staggered, stood bald, holding in his hand a weighty piece of log, from which fell on the floor red drop. "Grisha! Grisha!" screamed Masha, crying hysterically and breaking out of the hands of the stranger. Long-haired squatted over Grisha and put 2 fingers on his neck. "Damn! Well, you and the asshole. Without this was possible somehow." Bald something mumbled something in response, justifying that he himself climbed on them. Masha continued screaming, blaring over the music. "Knock her out already," the long-haired man shouted psychotically, after which the black man swung his fist at Masha. About 12 hours later, it was morning. 3 kilometers away from the village, in one of the ravines, a pile of spruce branches stirred. A few minutes later, a woman's arm, covered in abrasions and bruises, appeared from there. Every movement of the girl was accompanied by her groan. With difficulty, another branch was pulled away, and Maria's blue face, with blood on her lips, was revealed to the sunlight. She struggled to open her swollen eyelids, groping her shivering body with a trembling hand. The girl's sweater was pulled up and her pants were down. The criminals wanted to hide their victim under the spruce branches, but by doing so, without realizing it, they had saved her life. Otherwise, the girl would have frozen to death. What am I doing here? Where am I? Why am I so cold? Were running through her mind. Masha had a very bad headache. She did not remember how she reached her house at the edge of the village. On the way, she was accompanied only by pain in her whole body and a feeling of cold. There was no fear in Masha, no resentment, no grief. There was nothing in her but an inner emptiness, a buzzing head and the realization that she had to go home. No one saw her go into her house. Masha closed the door and, trembling, stood in the center of the kitchen. The girl's thoughts were jumbled, as if she had forgotten something and had no way of remembering something very important. She wanted to get into the water. She didn't understand why, but she really wanted to get in the water. Maybe just to warm up? Masha really didn't want to go outside to go to the bathhouse. Something was scaring her out there. She went to the bathroom and turned on the hot water. With naughty fingers, the girl took off all her clothes and threw them under her feet, nearly falling to the floor several times. Her legs did not hold her up well. Masha, completely undressed, turned around and looked at herself in the mirror. Ah ha ha ha! The girl started laughing loudly, pointing her finger in the mirror. What a beauty you are, Masha! The laughter turned into hysterical shudders. There was a smile on the girl's face. Bruises, abrasions and bruises covered her entire body. Am I the avatar? She asked the mirror. And how do I remember that word? A euro, she shifted her eyebrows and turned away and walked to the faucet. The bathtub was half filled. Masha closed the water and climbed in with great difficulty. Standing almost knee-deep in water, she looked at her hands. They were black, all muddy, and there even seemed to be small pieces of leaves sticking out under her fingernails. Masha's eyes traveled lower. She ran her palm along the inside of her thigh. There was caked blood on the girl's fingers. Masha looked down. There were circles on the water around her feet that were a dirty brown color. Masha just sighed tiredly and slowly lay down in the water. The first seconds, the abrasion stung badly, but then the body got used to it and the girl relaxed. Euro, I am finally warm. A Euro, Maria thought as she closed her eyes and smiled. The next day, some woman knocked at her house. Maria sat by the stove on a bearskin and rocked back and forth, covering her ears with her palms. The woman was shouting about some Grigory and accusing Masha of something. The next day turned out to be no less strange for Masha. Maria did not understand what was going on at all and what strangers in uniform wanted from her. She was asked questions about something terrible. Euro, why are they asking me this? A Euro, she thought, rocking in her chair and covering her ears so she wouldn't hear scary things about some girl. Then Masha was taken to the city by people in white coats. Some questions again. Euro, Eden, touch me. A Euro, she screamed, but she was stripped and examined anyway, and shaking her head, they wrote something on a paper. She needed no one to touch her. Masha sat still and was able to comply with requests to do something. But as soon as her skin, even through her clothes, was touched by someone's hand, she immediately became hysterical, screaming, crying, and howling. People in white coats calmed her down and told her that no one would touch her again. Maria was kept in the hospital until her bodily wounds healed. And about the mental ones, she was prescribed sedatives. She behaved well, and after a week, they let her go home. About a week later, Masha went outside. The village was whispering something, shaking their heads and looking at Maria. Euro, poor girl, how could this happen to us, in our quiet village? Masha heard from the neighbors, but could not understand which girl they were talking about. Masha knew the way to the store and knew that she needed to buy eggs. She had to make pancakes, but she didn't understand why she needed to and who all these people were around her. Shuffling away from everyone around her, after the store, she quickly ran back into her house. This was where she felt safe. Euro, need to make pancakes. A Euro, her mind was spinning. They are hungry. They need to be fed. Maria went to the kitchen, prepared the batter, and began frying the flavorful pancakes. When she was frying the last batch in the frying pan, she accidentally elbowed a jar of flour and it fell to the floor. Maria squatted down and, without moving, with a wooden spatula in her hand, looked in horror at the white stain near her feet. Letters began to appear across the scattered flour. Theas Maria bounced back and fell to the floor. She saw the sign that read Euro. Maria began to shake her head to the side. Dropping the spatula, She sat on her knees and began to clutch her head with her hands. "My red-headed sunshine." Maria raised her head sharply and looked around. But there was no one around. "Euro, you know I won't hurt you." "A euro," it sounded again. Masha jumped up and ran to her room, lied down on the bed and covered her ears. "Euro, I am your only friend. Don't be afraid of me. Euro, stop it. Stop it, where are you? Euro, I am in you. Euro, don't talk to me. Euro, too bad about the last pancakes." A Euro. Maria jumped up and ran into the kitchen. The smell of burning pancakes wafted through the house. Black smoke was rising above the frying pan to the ceiling. She quickly turned off the gas, put the frying pan aside, opened the window, and began waving her towel vigorously. "Euro, easy. I wish you well. Listen to me and everything will be all right." A Euro, came the voice again. Masha nodded her head in agreement. "Euro, you know what you need to do. They're waiting for you." A Euro. Maria took the plate on which the pancakes were piled. Placing 2 plates on the table, she placed 3 pancakes on each. With the remaining food in her hands, she left the kitchen. Maria went into a separate room that was used as a utility room. She threw back the mat on the floor and opened the lid to the basement and went downstairs. She turned on the light and, holding a plate in one hand, with the other she opened the metal door to the separate room where the canned goods were stored. As soon as she stepped into it, there were mooing sounds and fussing. Masha set her plate down on the table where the jars of strawberry jam stood and turned back around. 3 men were looking at her. The first was a full, bald man. The second had black hair. And the third with blonde hair pulled back into a ponytail. All had their arms and legs secured with zip ties, their mouths taped shut. They sat on the earthen floor at a distance from each other, their backs resting against the stone wall. In front of them, at chest level, a thick plank was fixed on which they used to stand the winter's billets. Thus, the men were practically motionless. The bound hands of each of them were stretched forward and rested on the board. A strong rope stretched from their wrists to their ankles, preventing them from sliding down and getting out. The men began to moo and twitch vigorously. Masha walked over and ripped the duct tape off each man's mouth. "What are you doing? Let us go. You're dead. You bitch. You'll wish you were dead." They shouted at Masha and threatened her. "Euro, feed them. They're hungry." A Euro, came a voice that only the girl could hear. Maria picked up a plate, picked up one fritter with her fork and walked over to the fat man. As she held out the flapjack to him, he pushed the fork with his shaved head and the food fell to the floor. He shouted something to her, but she silently picked up another one and walked over to the swarthy man. The one spit the flapjack right onto Masha's clothes and sent her where she didn't know how to go. When she approached the third one, the one with the ponytail, she handed him a pancake on a fork, but he told her to eat it herself, and if she didn't let them go now, he would bury her alive this time. Mary stiffened and stared at him fearfully for a few seconds without looking away. He, sensing that he had frightened her, smirked contentedly. In the next second, Masha grabbed the fork with the pancake and stuck it into the man's hand. The man yelled wildly. After that, she also calmly took the pancake from the plate with her hands and put it into his open mouth, from which the screams burst out. The man clenched his teeth and began to moan. Masha approached the black-haired man. He obediently opened his mouth before she even handed him the food. The bald man did the same. "Here we go. We've fed them. Can we go eat now?" Maria asked a question to someone, but the men didn't hear anyone answer her. Masha nodded her head, taped all the mouths back together, and before she left, she pulled out and took her fork with her. The first 2 men looked at her with their eyes, and the one with the ponytail howled as he tried to clamp the 4-hole wound with his other hand. Maria crawled out of the cellar and closed everything, as it were, and went into the kitchen, put down a plate, washed her hands, and sat down at the table where there were 2 plates of food. "Someone has to be here with me. Do you know who? Are you here?" "Euro, I am always here." A Euro, a voice answered her. "I am with you as it is. We don't need anyone else. The others are dangerous. Let's eat, we need our strength. We have a lot of work ahead of us." Euro. Masha put the kettle on and ate breakfast all alone, glancing at the plate opposite. Half a day had passed. Masha had a bad headache. A voice was whispering to her what she didn't want to hear. It was urging her to do things to those men that she didn't understand. But the voice assured her that they were suffering and Masha needed to free them. "Why me?" she asked, but the voice was silent. Maria curled up on the warm pelt by the stove, a fecal ball. "Euro, me sunshine. They're waiting." "Euro, do I have to do this?" "Euro, the axe is in the barn, honey." "A Euro," the voice insisted. "Euro eyes, you're right. We have to help them." Maria stepped outside. Passing by a tree with red rowan berries, she picked one brush with berries and put it in her jacket. And with the axe, she went back inside. In the kitchen, consulting my voice, I chose the largest sharpened knife. She took it all down to the cellar. When she returned, she took a pitchfork and a meat tenderizer, and then finally returned to the men. For the next 2 hours, the basement was filled with frantic screams and a wild roar that didn't sound human. And when all was quiet, Mashenka rose tiredly from the cellar on trembling legs. Behind her back sat motionless 3 men. The first, a full-bodied man, had his head resting on a board and an axe sticking out of his shiny shaven head. The second, the swarthy one, sat straight and stared ahead. His eyes still seemed to reflect terror, and a red rivulet trickled from the corner of his ajar mouth. The man's chest was propped up by a pitchfork that had pierced him through. On the board were his battered palms and a hammer. Everything around him was stained red. The third man's hair was not in a ponytail, as it was usually. Masha had untied it after she had cut off his manhood with a knife. His eyes were ajar, his head lowered. His gaze was directed downward, to the dirt floor, which beneath him was staining further and further into a dirty red color. There was a large kitchen knife sticking out of the ringleader's chest, in the area of the heart, which had been hammered to the hilt. Maria was all stained. She immediately went to the bathtub and got some water and climbed in. Sitting in the water, she looked at the dirty brown circles and could not remember where she had seen them before. After she washed and dressed, she went to the stove. She was trembling all over. Masha was very cold. "You are free now, my red-haired sunshine, and they are free too," said Maria's voice. "Free," repeated the girl quietly, lying down on the bare skin. It was getting dark outside the window. Masha did not turn on the light. She kept her eyes on the tongues of flame that danced merrily in the stove, illuminating the girl's trembling body. She was cold. She stood up and began to toss one log after another. The flames grew so hot that sparks were flying all around. One of them, falling on the black bare skin, began to ignite quickly. Black smoke began to billow and the flames engulfed the entire hide. Maria stood nearby and watched the fire on the floor. She smiled. "Look," she turned to the voice. "There you can see someone lovingly embracing his girlfriend." Masha was glowing with happiness, but no one answered her. The flames spread to the floor and spread in different directions. People could be heard screaming in the street, and Masha did not move from her seat. She felt very good. Her eyes were watering and she wanted to cough, but she smiled and even laughed in her voice. Suddenly, the front door of the house was broken down. Someone's strong male hands grabbed Masha by the waist and dragged her outside. She screamed and demanded to be let go. "Don't touch her." But the hands only loosened when she was outside, a safe distance from the fire. Maria's wooden house was so hot that half the village was gathered around it. The firemen tried unsuccessfully to put out the flames that were devouring the old logs. And Masha just stood nearby, near a red mountain ash tree, and calmly looked at the burning house. The girl slowly picked the frosted, bitter red berries and put them in her mouth, chewing them with gusto. Maria smiled, raising her satisfied face upward, exposing it to the cold moonlight. "She's gone mad, redhead. Not for nothing about her family whispered all sorts of things," said one grandmother. "God's dandelion." Another, "God forbid, Nikotikna. She's been through so much. Why don't they take her to the nut house?" asked one man in uniform to another. "Who knows? They came and said that she was just in shock. But there is no danger to her health and she is not dangerous to others. Why lock her up?" "So they didn't take her away." And here it is. It's a good thing her house is separate. About 6 months later, psychiatrist's office. Mashenka, dear, how are you feeling? Asked the doctor. Good, answered quietly the girl, lowering her head and looking at the floor. My girl, you are good. You and I, for a month now, have switched to lighter medicines. Tell me, do you hear nothing anymore? No voices come to you? Masha shook her head negatively. Nothing bothers you? You don't see anything terrible? No, doctor, everything is fine, she answered, raising her eyes to the wall. Good, Mashenka. Let's watch a little TV with you, okay? She nodded. Only if you don't like something, you can always tell the doctor. Understand? Yes, doctor, Maria said, raising her eyes to the hanging TV on the wall. The psychiatrist turned on the news, which was on tape, and paused. They were showing and saying that after years of girls disappearing all over the area, the culprits had finally been caught. Along with them was the father of one of the maniacs, who held a high-ranking position covering up the deeds of his son, one of the 3 participants in the crimes. The TV screen showed the 4 accused sitting in the courtroom, behind bars. One of them is an older man. The other 3 are young guys, one with long hair, one with black hair, and one bald. Do you know any of these people, Mashenka? The doctor asked. No, the girl answered calmly, indifferently looking at the TV screen. We understand, my dear. The doctor turned off the TV. You see, he turned to the young man opposite. It's her defense response to the stress she's been through. She's in remission now. She's improving. However, you realize that the diagnosis of manic depressive psychosis, or otherwise bipolar disorder, cannot be simply taken away, and she must be under medical supervision. I understand, doctor. The young man nodded. But is there no chance at all? It's not like she was born with it, maybe it's still. You see, most likely it's genetic, and it was revealed exactly when the doctor looked at the switched-off TV, when she had an accident. It worked as a trigger for the disease. The doctor snapped his fingers. The man lowered his head down, nodding in response. You remember it yourself. She was fine, and after her disappearance and the crime that was committed on her by 3 subhumans, or whatever you want to call them, she started acting differently, right? And seeing that, you were right to call for help. She could have hurt not only herself, but others around her. Masha kept saying she was talking to a friend, seeing voices. Maria stopped recognizing everyone she knew. Yeah, I'd come to see her, but at first she'd just shy away from me. Exactly. She'd cry, she'd laugh. Her depressive, lethargic state would quickly turn to aggression and back again. She burned down her house, but thank God no one was hurt. What if things had turned out differently? Yes, I understand. She needs treatment. I'll tell you more. Maria told me that supposedly this very voice in her head assured her that she had an obligation to punish bad people or save them. I never realized. And in whispers, Masha shared with me that she did terrible things. I think it was the remnants of her consciousness that wanted to get even with her abusers, but she didn't realize it. She didn't remember anything. I even wondered sometimes what was going through her mind, what she was thinking when the anger in her eyes was replaced by a smile. Yeah, it's a good thing those voices stopped now a few months ago. Yes, doctor, I sincerely sympathize with you. A very beautiful girl. The doctor looked at the girl with green eyes and red hair gathered in a half-disturbed bundle. Thank you. It's just a pity that she doesn't realize that the culprits have finally been punished and won't hurt anyone else. Maybe she'd feel better. On the other hand, she's living her life as if it never happened. Maybe it's for the best. I think it's better this way, the man replied. Well, it's time for Mashenka to rest, said the psychiatrist and turned to the girl. Come on, my girl. Say goodbye to your friend and let's go to your room. The girl raised her eyes to the man sitting next to the doctor. On her looked blue eyes full of tears. Grigory brushed them away with his hand, touching his hair, from under which on the temple showed a whitish scar. Mashenka, say goodbye to Grisha. He often visits you. He does not need to be afraid. He is your friend. Do not cry, quietly said Masha to her stranger. All of you will pass. Grigory smiled sadly at her. Yes, my love. I'm not crying. Go rest. I'll come again in a few days." The psychiatric hospital employee approached Maria and gently took her under his arm. Maria twitched a little, but continued to remain in an indifferent state. She was led into a room, helped to lie down on a bed, and left there alone. About 5 minutes passed. The girl twitched at a strange sound and sat up in the bed. She looked around. Painted walls, a table, a chair, a nightstand, and across from her bed a latticed window through which bright sunlight poured. Masha got out of bed and went to the window. She pulled back the curtain and saw a piece of paint falling off the wall on the floor. Then she raised her eyes to the white spot of whitewash from which the piece had fallen off. "Ah!" Maria sighed fearfully and jumped back. Letters began to appear on the plain white piece of wall. Masha bit her lower lip nervously and stared at what was happening. Letter after letter appeared on the wall, and everything stopped only when the girl saw one single word. "Let go." The girl threw the curtain she was holding in her hand at the wall and ran to her bed. "No, no," she repeated in a whisper. "It's all right. No, I won't let you in. I won't let you into my head. No, it's okay. It's not." Masha turned away from the window, closed her eyes, and pulled the blanket up to her chin with trembling hands, with broken nails and whitewash-stained fingers. "Hello, my sunshine." The girl opened her eyes abruptly and turned around. There was no one in the ward, only Mashenka, one word she had scrawled on the wall, and that familiar voice in her head.